growing wild.
Looking after the land.
Wildlife pond. Bats.
Cell bunting.
You have to put that potato.
Dung beetles.
Living off the land, 100 years of farming in South Devon. Episode 3, Field Margins. Farming in a protected landscape. Higher level stewardship.
In terms of produce, we have the hens, which are laying eggs, and just the beef off the farm. Most of which, I say about 80% of it is sold locally. And we're also in a high level stewardship scheme, which means that we basically get an income for looking after the land, and we've done things like we plant areas of wild bird seed mixture to feed wild birds over the winter, and we've been rebuilding hedge banks and replanting hedges, and we've been looking after, so we've got about 30 or 40 acres of species rich grassland which we protect and don't plough up and things, so you get an income for looking after that, which ties in well with all the organic kind of farming principles, I suppose. So those are the three main sources of income, and I think that's worked quite well, because it kind of allows us to farm in an environmentally friendly way, in a way in which we're comfortable, but at the same time it allows you to make a living, so it works well.
The farm's in HLS, the environmental scheme, so we have educational access. So I have about 4 or 5 groups of students each year. There's 2 regularly from Plymouth University come in. We've had German students in the last 2 years come over from East Germany. A couple schools from home counties. So that's a little side bit, which is quite enjoyable actually, because it's similar to the visitors aspect. They're completely uneducated about farming. They don't understand anything at all about how produce or milk, beef is actually produced. And I think they gain a lot from it. Luckily, we had a girls' school from Weybridge come down last summer, and on the day they attended, there was a cow calving. So they managed to see 90% of that, which was a big thing to them. They did, the shock of where it actually appears from, and and within 10 minutes, 15 minutes of it falling out, it's trying to stand up and drink, is absolutely, they couldn't take it on board. So, and of course, with the technology this day and age, they had photos of it, I think it was on Facebook, Twitter, everything, by the time they'd even left. So, sending photos to their families, because they just couldn't comprehend that a calf is born so quick, stands up, feeds, and within a day is out running around like a lunatic.
Another thing that probably haven't mentioned over the years is, of course, the red tape that we've had to adhere to. Really, everything was gentleman agreements years ago, and now everything has to be in writing, and rules and regulations for this, that and the other. And of course it comes hard to a farmer, because a farmer's at his best in the fields, not in the office. And although we've had to learn to deal with it, because we do get payments for adhering to these rules and regulations, and the latest one is we don't get subsidies, as some people think, anymore for keeping animals or growing crops, but we do get, if you like, a big grant for looking after the environment, the land and the environment, and keeping it in GAEC, good agricultural and environmental condition. If anybody queries us getting the payment, we have to adhere to these rules and regulations, and I do feel that if we didn't have some sort of help, just about all the small farmers would be non-existent, and that would leave our hilly land just growing wild, and we would only have the big farmers in existence, growing probably dairy cows in factories, literally like factories, so they more or less are already, and the fields would be just mainly arable crops. We wouldn't see many animals in the fields, because just about everything would be, even the grass would be grown and taken to the cows, which would be in big buildings. So I feel that it's good that we do get payments to keep the smaller farmers' heads above water. The single farm payment and the environmental payment is quite a substantial amount, and it possibly could be as much as 40% of the total income. Now I have to bear in mind that the other 60% cost me a lot of money. So profit-wise, as long as we obey the rules and regulations, the payments for looking after the farm and looking after the environment are probably a better income than the actual commodity income, because of the commodity income. As I said, it's a profit we're looking for, not just the income but the profit. And as years go by, you suddenly think, oh, we're getting £100 for lambs now, and then you suddenly realise that the nuts that we had to feed to the sheep in the winter, especially the ones that had twins, were getting them. They were over £300 a tonne, which is an awful lot. But you've got to keep them alive if you're going to get the £100 a head for them. So there are good prices for lamb, and it's good prices for beef at the moment. But the farmers, they say, are always moaning. Well, I don't moan like some, but there's usually some reason for it, and it's unfortunate. It might even just because they're tired, because they love their job and they work all hours, and I don't work all hours at it because I'm getting older and I try to use my head instead of my hands.
Well, obviously 2006 we had a flock of sheep here. We ended up lambing about 140 sheep. The workload was getting too great and the hours were too long, and our older member of staff was about to retire, so the decision was made to cease the flock, and we continue and up the cows a bit. So then the forerunner to that, we were actually involved in the habitat scheme, which was a forerunner to that previous, back in the 80s. When you started the habitat scheme?
I'm not sure.
80s, 90s, we had the habitat scheme in the valley anyway. And then we had involvement in the Cyclo project, which was a forerunner to the catchment sensitive. So it seemed a natural progression then to apply for HLS. We got HLS on the pretense of sow bunting, the environment for sow buntings. We overwinter stubbles. We grow half a hectare of bird food. We have a monument site on the farm as well, which gave us the points to enter into it. We had the less favourable land, which was what we used for sheep grazing, which then went into zero fertiliser application. And then obviously we have the valley itself. So we were accepted in November 2006. And obviously educational access was on that as well. So since then we've abided by the HLS system, and it's worked very well for us, to be fair.
Affinity with the land.
We've got lots of things on the farm which remind us of the history. We've got the meadows which were obviously used for irrigation probably 150, 200 years ago, where that you can still see the channels which are overgrown now with grass and are grazed by the cattle and sheep. We still see, going on from that, we still see the remains of the old leat, which leads into the old thrashing barn, where the water wheel was sold by my father for scrap iron. And I remember the other water wheel, which was for the cider press on the other side of the farm. We had two water wheels. I don't remember the water wheels, or I do just at about 3 or 4 years old. And he sold them from scrap iron, and he had from the scrap iron merchant, he bought 2 wheelbarrows.
And you've got an area there which is tillage, and that was set aside for tillage. You're not allowed to plough the grass fields. The only thing that was relaxed slightly as the time went by, that if you went to the landlord and said, would he take back 10 acres of the tillage, you cede it back, and then he'd let you plough 10 acres. But strictly speaking, you had tillage area and a grass area, and you had to stick to it. And I think the reason for that was that so that the tenant didn't go in and plough up the whole fields, whole farm, and leave it, walk away and leave it.
So the meadows are now where the water channels are, and those water channels would all have their own pond 150, 200 years ago, if you can imagine the water channels running along the contours, eventually it comes to where the stream is coming down the valley, and there would be a pond with a sluice gate. We've got probably 3 disused ponds like that, but we have got one of those ponds which used to service the threshing barn, is actually being brought back into a use for environmental purposes as a wildlife pond, and is fed by a spring but also by a pipe, but unfortunately because of the floodwater it's got silted up and needs to be worked on. But at least the spring is still working, but it's not quite so good for the oxygen.
We were talking about doing up the hedges, the Devon banks earlier, and obviously when I first left school we were doing those with Devon spades. And you have 4 of us out there in the winter time going around these fields, taking out of the foot of the hedge and putting that on top, on the crown of the hedge. And we'd go, I suppose, we wouldn't go more than 3 foot from the base of the hedge, throwing that up on top. Obviously now with time gone on, we do it with a 4-end loader, forklift, and we're putting a lot heavier, a lot more soil on top. Really, it's an improvement to what we were doing. We're really making the hedges a lot firmer now than what they were.
We've got the cattle are around in different fields. We're not allowed to spread much nitrogen on the fields, so therefore we don't get an abundance of grass, and if we haven't got an abundance of grass we can't have too many cattle in a field, otherwise they're going to be grazing it a bit tight. And so if we have a few cattle in each field and a few sheep in each field, they complement each other, and the dung beetle is looked after, which the greater horseshoe bat feeds off. And of course we've got a few hedges left to grow up for the habitat for the bats. If we listen we can hear all the birds singing, and that's nothing compared with 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, if I should be out of bed and put my head outside the door. The dawn chorus this time of the year is really, really marvellous. We have got, in the last 12 months, we've had a red kite, which has got this V piece in its tail, so I understand. I've never been very good on my birds, but this red kite, it was pointed out to us, and he does like standing on our barn, and I'm looking at the barn now and I can see the white mess he used to drop. Being a big bird, he would leave a big mark behind. We've got all the birds we expect to see are here because of our environmental scheme, because we're not high production. Luckily we've got 300 acres to spread it over, but if I had a farm of 80 acres I probably wouldn't be able to do this. I'd be having to have a part-time job, or possibly sowing more nitrogen and forgetting all about the wildlife.
I can remember the old field being done that was perhaps a bit steep for a combine harvester, because that's something that we don't go on such steep ground growing grain now as they did. They put any field in grain because they could get the horses to cut it with the binder. The steeper the ground, the more horses they had in front.
It is going to be extremely difficult for a small farm to be able to carry on. I can see, it's not going to be very easy. I know everybody would want, we've got Prince Charles saying, well, we mustn't lose the small farms. I can sympathise with that thought, but it is going to be extremely difficult.
The mixed family farms are a thing of the past. It's really sad to say that. Mm. It's okay if you've got no debt, then you're going to be fine. You've got sort of the good life sort of thing, doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But
money's got to come from somewhere. Yeah. It doesn't grow on trees.
We've had bats in the cellar of the farmhouse, because bats are amazing at what small hole they can get through. And because the farmhouse being listed, well, all the buildings are listed as well. The farmhouse being listed, of course, it's old, and it's very difficult for it to be draft proof, and unless you're draft proof, you're not bat proof. But I haven't seen any hanging around in the last year or two, but we do know they're here because we see them in the summer, in the evenings. My wife doesn't like them, but I just say keep your head down.
We're very fortunate. This farm is a very fertile farm, very fertile. You know, when I go to shows and that, they always say, well, of course you live in the land of the living. But, okay, it is very beneficial, but also you have to look after that land. You know, my grandfather and my father, we've always tried to put back in what we take out. And that's the only way the land will survive. If you think you're going to drag it all out and still have it afterwards, it won't happen. You have to put back what you take out.
Our biggest issue here is the gradient of the land because it's relatively steep. So if we're not careful, we get a lot of sort of soil erosion through washing and that. So that's something we need to be very, very careful about.
Most of our fields have got a piece that are level on the top, then you have steep, or you've got steep and level on the bottom. We've got very few fields that are totally flat. We've got a few fields that are flat, but you know, it's classified as grade 3 land. But having said that, there's soil depth on nearly all the fields of well over 18 inches of soil. It would be medium red soil, and that soil is really productive soil if you look after it.
I mean, there was fairly strict rules with these orchards. You weren't supposed to stock them with anything but small animals, and not larger animals, because they damaged the trees, and if a tree died you had to replace it. Well, it got to the stage when there was no purpose in replacing it because there was no use for the apples produced from it, I suppose. And then, but that's why they were all taken out, brought back into growing useful crops. I mean, that was a useful crop in its time and still is. I mean, there's apples growing all over the world now, isn't there? Well grown, and that was done on a more local scale in those days. I mean, if you go into the Totnes area, you'll find there's more apples now, apple trees, than there were in our area. But, well, I said there's about nearly 5 acres on Strachley, which was quite a size of acreage. The other thing is there was a lot of the apples were gathered and stored in the house for domestic use. Like, I mean, a lot of cooking was apples, and there was only sort of winter fruit you had, wasn't it? There was apples. I mean, I remember gathering these apples. You'd go down with the horse and wagon and gather loads of them and take them up and store them in the house.
We were very lucky with South Ayrshire and Trenwell. We've got a natural line going through the soil, and very few fields have to be topped up with lime. Even back several years ago when we were ICI costed, we were using then a lot of fertiliser, like half a tonne an acre, and even then it didn't affect the lime content of the soil. I think Philip will tell you now that the soil is just about the same sort of structure as it was then, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
The lime, there is that natural lime in it, which obviously our own water supply is affected by that because it's very hard water. So that's one of the downsides.
Yeah, because I'm here talking to you now in relaxed fashion. The birds are relaxed, and I'm seeing them, and I think they're out and about. It's a two-way thing. If I came out the yard and straight on the tractor, I don't know whether it's I wouldn't see them or whether they wouldn't surface until the tractor's gone. I don't know. But the swallows galore, isn't there?
You had more of affinity with the land too, in that respect. You had more time. I mean, a man with a horse and a plough, his daily work rate was about an acre a day. That's what he could plough a day. Well, we now plough acres an hour with our machinery, and I am very fond of ploughing. I used to do quite a lot of competition ploughing at one stage, and the problem with a lot of things you do now that are not there very long for you to appreciate. If you did a nice bit of ploughing in a grass field, it used to go back nice and firm, and you've got to look at that for weeks afterwards, but not now. It's upside down, worked over and put into a crop. Everything's so much quicker, so much faster. You don't have the time. You do when you get a crop like that field of barley over here now blowing in the wind, seeing it rustle like that. That's quite rewarding to see that. Yes, you can get quite poetic about it, I suppose, if were that way inclined.
Fields have names.
Most of the fields have got names. One particular field quite close to the buildings is called Shoot Park.
And that field there is called Emmet. Of course, in Cornwall, Emmet's grockles to us, holidaymakers, right? Do you know what an Emmet is? It's an ant. That's why the Cornish call it, like a lot of ants running around. And that field, evidently, in fact, out over onto the cliff ground there is ant hills. So evidently that field was full of ant hills when they actually first took it, reclaimed it, or whatever you like to call it.
Then you come down to the orchard, which is one rood, 20 purges. That's a little orchard.
We've got Grattan,
Bully's Field, yonder Bully's Field.
Triggs Down, Beachfield, Lower Shallarbor Down.
we've got Lower Crimps, Higher Crimps,
Plain Down.
First Blackridge and Yonder Blackridge. Yonder Blackridge means out yonder, which could be nearly a mile up the road, which is probably our furthest afield field.
That was a great orchard. I think it's 4 acres or something like that.
Heath Parks.
Long Meadow, Second Meadow, that's all where the caravans are.
We've then got the next one is called Little Inwells.
Bully's Field.
Ballfield, Lower Royal Hill, Higher Royal Hill, Lower Loose Hill, Higher Loose Hill,
Moorpot Meadow.
Little Loose Hill, Big Loose Hill, Lower Meadow, Bickerborough Meadow, Bickerborough Hill, Bowling Green Field, Little Bickerborough.
Bowling Green. There's a bit of history to Bowling Green because there was officially a bowling green there laid out, and I think Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh and those sort of people came there in their lifetime to play bowls, and it was there. It's gone now. It's gone into this old system. So that's Bowling Green.
The next one is called Big Inwells.
What have we got? We've got a Barnes Park. Of course, you've always got one of them. Very few farms that haven't got a Barnes Park.
Cold Rings.
Favourite old name, Rat Park.
And then the next one is called Broadgates.
Peacefield.
Oak Park.
A Latch Park. A Long Park.
And then it's called Diamonds Meadow.
A Stony Park that's not stony, that is.
And we've got Cross Park, which obviously is near the crossroads.
Oakley.
Pond Meadow.
Bickerabah, Barnfield, Topfield or Tapfield, Pomeroy's.
Jenkin Acres. 2 Jenkin Acres, inner and outer. And those are 5 acres and 6 acres, I think.
We then get down towards the marshland, and that field down there is called Peters Park.
Race Park. Why Race Park? I don't know.
And we've got Bridge Park. Now, where would that be? Obviously near the bridge. And that's down the road.
Start Gate up here, because it's Start Point, and there's a gate up there. But strangely enough, both this farm and the next door farm have got one Start Gate on Down Farmers there, and Start Gate for Start Farm is there, right up in the roads in between.
Gorse Meadow, 12 acres.
Plain Down.
Homer 8 acres, Yonder, 8 acres.
Come back the road then back towards the farm buildings again on the left hand side, going down towards the beach. The first one is called Bear Park.
And then there's a Mowhay that's a little area where they made the ricks and those sort of the corn ricks and the hay ricks.
Broad Haze, Little Broad Haze, Big Broad Haze. Lower
Bars, which I think is short for Barrow Park, I think. Lower Bars, Higher Bars.
Mowhay, that's right. Warren, that was a tillage. We're now onto the tillage fields. So Warren.
The next one is called Four Close.
Higher Dead Park, Lower Brake, Little Worthall,
Higher Wadgety Field,
Homer Hall Park, I think it is, Heathfield, Fort Bridge, Velvet Park.
We got fields out here. We've got a Rick Park here, which is that one. Again, that's quite explanatory.
The next one is called Dates Bottom Park. The next one's called Exlades. Then Ashman's Park and Forth.
Firs Park, but it's not covered in firs, so I don't know why that got its name.
A start breach and a middle breach. Don't know where that came from. Whether it's breach, it's spouted breach as in a gun, or whether it's breech as in your breeches that you wear. Don't know about that. I got one theory, but I may be wrong. We think we had what I would class, that size, I don't know where it is now. Could have been a cannonball from at some stage, but why it would be there? I count to come up 400 feet from the sea, because it wouldn't have been possible in those days.
Brookford, Higher Brookford, Lower Brookford, Brown Park, Broom Park, this, not BROOM, Broom Park, Homer Brodyfield, and Outer Brodyfield.
We then go up on the higher side of the farm, and we've then got a field called Three Cornered Hill.
Barn Park, Homer Down, Yander Down, Lower Down. We had a field at Pro which was known as Down, and we used to go up and down, up and down.
New Park, Stony Wolves, Higher Bottom Park.
Oh, and the ones outside, yonder back hill, I expect.
What else have we got? More. Well, we got a field called Moor. They tend to be woods and are a little bit wetter than normal. And that one is a bit damp at times. That's where our springs are, top field.
Yeah, that's all this side of the road. The other side is Eastern Stone, Western Stone, Higher Stone.
Ludgate, Newman's, 5 acres, Lower Down Barn.
Middle Acres.
Beacon Park.
Higher Beacon Park, the highest point. Lower Beacon Park, Big Kits, Little Kits.
First Lakes.
We've got a Great Down. But there's quite a few of them on different farms, so evidently probably the biggest field of the lot. But again, she's down on downland.
Lower Bottom Park.
We've got New Park, which I think is a field that was probably brought into production near the woods, which is always trying to go back to nature. Always trying to go back to the weather. They brought this one into production and called it New Park because it was a new field for the farm.
Beacon, which is right out on the cliff.
Land over Coombe, the land over the Coombe. Meaning the Coombe being the Salt Valley.
And the field below that is called Downs.
Other than that, nothing more exciting than that.
In field margins, we heard from Harry Kurzweil, Jill Kurzweil, David Dark, Phil Dark, David Wall, Mark Wall, Richard Foss, John Sherrill, Jean Sherrill, Roger Tucker, John Tucker, Bill Salter, and Marjorie Buckpitt. Living Off the Land was produced by Lucinda Guy for Sound Art Radio in partnership with South Devon Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty and was supported by the Heritage Lottery Fund as part of All Our Stories.